Dynamic meditation is a highly specialized and extremely difficult form of meditation or bodywork, intended to teach you how to manage your brain and its emotional systems yourself, hence the term brain management. The first step is to manage destructive or useless anger, firmly anchored to old pain. By old pain, we mean fear and grief, which terrorize or misguide your body and thoughts and disrupt your rage system. It needs to find his natural basis back, or pure strength. And when his services are not called for, it should drop to zero, which for most of us isn't the case. To explain it simply, all your strength should only be linked to the love for yourself, your life or your body, and only be activated by protective kinds of fear. Your strength or yang qi is there to protect your self-love and guided by healthy kinds of fear, which it doesn't in most of us. The Indians call this pure connection the Kundalini energy. I call it your best friend, the emotional sword and child you lost since childhood. The second step is to consciously manage your fear system with the pure strength of your rage system, or this Kundalini energy. It can serve you very well in, killing and managing destructive fears. The Chinese would call this fighting your demons. I call it therapeutic exorcism. The right way or intention to get this done is, crucial here. It will only make sense and lead to something if the intention of the act is right. We want to protect the love for yourself, life, or your body from destructive fears. They are all firmly linked to the 5 senses of your body. The intention is to destroy them forever or to remove them out of the program of your amygdala or emotional motherboard forever. Indeed, this is pure exorcism, but in a Pavlovian way and with profound and permanent effect. Under these fears, and that is the third step, lies the layer of destructive grief. It is waiting in the dungeon of your brain for the moment it can escape safely. Grief is like water. It comes when it's ready for it, but in an exhausted body or burdened mind, it is stuck or just, painful. It doesn't seem to work quite well or not at all for its original purpose, dealing with loss. But in a strong, healthy and relaxed brain, discharging deep grief becomes curing and soothing again. Every one of us, unconsciously holds countless forms of self-destructive fear, anger and grief. Fear and anger, they orchestrate all kinds of war and terror in our heads. Deep sadness, from which we all try to elope, really dominates our lifestyle every single day. The best documented, now popular and most researched weapon we have to tackle fears on a neurophysiological basis is EMDR, or eye movement desensitization in combination with behavioral therapy. In comparison to EMDR, we kind of follow the same methodology or approach in how to map and manage the sensory triggers that provoke stress or fear. 20 years ago, I had to leave this methodology behind because honestly, it yielded far too little and too slow results. It was just not getting things done for people with severe trauma or high levels of fear or anger. Moreover, this methodology fails to reduce the level of fear, anger or physical stress to zero. And the greatest disadvantage of this methodology lies in the fact that you need something or someone else to guide you. I want to teach myself and others to evolve alone towards self-care with your own tools and body anywhere and anytime. Back then, I wanted to counter the emotional laziness or inertia to overcome fears yourself. The so-called womb psychiatry, which still dominates the field of my specialty in medicine, only leads to long waiting lists and will cost us bags full of money and, honestly, little result. Behavioral therapy speaks for itself and works in a very logical way. You start with small fears and go upward from there. They claim to work Pavlovian or to deeply retrain the dog or the elephant in your brain, but this is not quite the case. Some kinds of fear are somewhat shifted indeed, but return in other forms or later in life. And by the way, which owner pulls his scared dog by the leash to drag him through his fears, even if they are moderate? Of course, we also start with small fears. But the difference is that we first have taught the person for months to handle all levels of fear. Worrying, fear and panic. The combination of using behavioral therapy and DMT or dynamic meditation techniques is therefore logical. So back to dynamic meditation. How does emotional discharge actually work? Anger is, well, a powerful emotion which, in its unpure form or when it's guided by destructive fear, can end up terrorizing yourself or even others. In dynamic meditation, anger isn't suppressed. Instead, it's consciously evoked and, channeled out of an intention of self-love, self-protection, or even protection of life itself. This, of course, requires a reprogramming of the brain because, honestly, everyone over the generations has learned to use anger destructively, for example, to harm themselves or others. Some meditative masters, or even Buddhist teachings, want only to suppress anger, and that's actually one of the pitfalls around mindfulness. The real challenge, I think, lies in teaching what we might call positive anger. It's about learning to use your anger, strength, or even cocaine system as a healthy protective force, rather than letting it become a destructive impulse. That's why, honestly, I call it your friend. It's really the perfect companion to help send your fears forever down the lane. Now, the role of physical techniques is quite significant here. Through targeted physical and vocal techniques, individuals can, learn to direct or manage their emotions in a much healthier way. A core component of dynamic meditation, actually, is the use of physical and vocal techniques that really help facilitate the expression of anger. For instance, there's the shoshuten, a forward movement from Japanese sword fighting, which, increases your attack strength. And then there's the kiai, a short, explosive shout often used in martial arts such as karate or aikido. Both best start from your pelvis or your hara, and that makes a huge difference, but can be taught to everyone. Practical application and examples. In dynamic meditation, therapists begin with techniques for which the least emotional inhibition exists. For example, someone with a physical blockage to expressing anger, perhaps due to shame or fear, can start with simple breathing exercises or light movements before discovering their own shoshuten or kiai. Recently, a therapist's kiai sounded like the voice of the devil himself in an exorcist movie. "That's your kiai," I said, and she could feel it perfectly. The shoshuten, or the small circle of energy, focuses on fluid, powerful movements that do not overload the body and, interestingly, do not seem to bother people with severe back problems or surgeries. From the start, we tried to teach a sword fighting technique, but, using a tennis racket with a soft handle and at hip height. It follows the same fluid line as a galloping horse, or, the swimming technique of the dolphin. In Chinese Tai Chi or Japanese Kiko, these movements are part of the arsenal to exercise your body for martial arts and health purposes. As with EMDR, we target sensory triggers such as, seeing the grin of a bully or perpetrator, hearing the sound of a voice, or perhaps hearing a name or insult. There's also feeling, a physical sensation, such as a hand on the throat smelling, a smell that evokes a traumatic event, and of course tasting, a taste that triggers bad memories. By integrating these triggers into a controlled setting, as in a kata, which is an imagined battle in martial arts, we can learn together to discharge anger or fear in a correct way. This process really does require discipline and time, and honestly, it's comparable to achieving a black belt in martial arts, which sometimes takes years of training. But as said, everyone can do it, and sometimes faster than you think. Learning dynamic meditation is, honestly, an intensive process that requires both time and dedication. Everybody needs at least 6 months to master one or perhaps a few techniques optimally. It's not something you can rush, and the challenges along the timeline are very real. For most people it is, let's face it, difficult to practice independently at home. This is partly due to their fear and shame, but especially due to what we might call emotional laziness. That's the ingrained habit of waiting for others to solve problems, to hold your hand, or just hoping that an annoying situation changes on its own. This is a deeply rooted, culturally learned habit, and honestly, it requires the necessary effort from all of us to want to break it. They invented bread and games to keep us lazy, remember? After the first 6 months, the therapy focuses on addressing deeper blockages such as fear, guilt, or even destructive compassion. For example, sacrificing your own needs for others with bad consequences for yourself. The goal is to transform these emotionally deeply ingrained habits from destructive to constructive fear, guilt, and empathy. The objective of dynamic meditation is therefore certainly not only the discharge of anger, but the restoration of emotional balance by eliminating destructive fear, guilt, compassion, and other forms of self-anger or, self-mutilation. Finally, we end up discharging deep sadness, which, as mentioned, only discharges in a good way. Or, well, only in a healthy, calm and powerful brain. And take it from me, you don't have this yet. Ultimately, this emotional therapeutic process prevents your anger or your anger system from, exploding less or never again. For example, aggression toward others, or imploding, such as self-hatred or depression. This is, quite frankly, something that current cognitive forms of therapy simply cannot achieve. Is this neurophysiological enough for you now? Training of therapists. A dynamic meditation therapist must undergo extensive and honestly lengthy training to somewhat master the techniques, to get to know themselves, and especially their personal fears as well, in order to expertly guide patients from there. This training requires multiple forms of knowledge and education around neurophysiology trauma processing, as well as, years of practical experience in unblocking your own emotional blockages. As mastering a black belt in martial arts requires years of dedication, it demands from a DMter the dedication of a Buddhist monk on top of their active life. Dynamic meditation is, for me, the most difficult, but honestly the most rewarding form of meditation there is. It really forms the basis for being able to perform 3-step meditation all alone in the long run. It's shown briefly in the Symposium podcast, and it means killing fear the right way, relaxing mindfully and preparing for the next battle. Until the next podcast, or, you can click them yourself under the English language series Meme City, or the Dutch language The Mouse and the Elephant on my YouTube channel. And do subscribe, as if your life and your health depend on it. And it does depend.